Saturday to just but I'm glad to be here. And first, just want to kind of shout out everybody that was able to present and share their knowledge with us today. Thank you all, because I think we all have a different journey to how we got to our BCBA career, and it's great to learn from others. Huh. And yes, I want to. Hold on, let me get the internets back up. Yes. Sorry, it's not working with the keyboard. Thank you. Great. So some of our learning objectives, again, trying to lean into ethics for this last CEU, want to try to talk about how we can align different applications of ABA outside direct practice with the foundational principles of ABA and our 4 branches. We want to identify some of the distinctions and things that we should keep in mind if we are transitioning outside of your primary individual-driven practice. So we're going to look at the ethics code. And then I want to help you guys kind of define some strategies that you could use to narrow into your scope of competence and align that with the scope of practice of our. And then lastly, and there's a download tool using the 7 dimensions to define and filter out what is an appropriate consultation opportunity. All right. I started out in early childhood education and I had no idea what a BCBA was. It was back in the day when kids were very first getting identified with like PDD, NOS. And that was very exciting to me because it meant that I wasn't a bad teacher. I just needed to learn more. And so I ended up here at UT studying autism and developmental disabilities. When I was certified in 2011, there were 8,500 BCBAs total, and now we're over 85,000. That's just crazy. I started as an independent provider, as most of us did in those days, because we didn't have insurance funding. And then I've been in clinics, I've been in schools, I've been all over the place. And when I started working in some of those large-scale clinical environments, I felt like I was no longer practicing the science that I was really passionate about. And it led me through a burnout journey. So we're not going to talk too much about that. But I do want to kind of understand, I know some of you, some familiar faces, and we learned a little bit about our certification history and how long we've been in the field. But we haven't done that in comparison to certification. So if you've been certified for more than 2 years, raise your hand again. Okay, 2 to 5, over 5, 5 to 10, over 10. Not that many of us. Okay, now for those of you that have been in practice before you became a BCBA, how many years do you add? Did you go straight in? Were you like, I learned about this and then I got certified? Yeah, okay. Less than a year before you took that path? 1 to 3 years, anybody? Anybody 3 or 5 years before you actually went into behavior analysis? All right, what about 5 or more? Yeah, you've been in your whole life. That's great. Okay, now primary experience settings. And if you have more than one, I want to know where you guys identify with. Who works in clinics right now or has for a majority of their career? In home or combo, schools, other. All right, got some others. That's great. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about how ABA has changed since I've been involved in the field. I will also say economy of language is not my strength. There's lots of words on the slides, but I'm going to give them to you, so don't have to read along. But in the early 2000s, services were mostly in home. They were very limited. It was either hospital research for severe populations or wealthy families that would pay you to come to their house. Our service hours were very limited, and it was mostly BCBA direct services. In the 2010 to 2014, this is where we got the tipping point in that prevalence data, and insurance mandates started kicking in. So access to services increased. Small ABA companies instead of independent providers started to grow. And most Companies were owned and operated by BCBAs. That's crazy, right? And technician service delivery grew. In 2014, that's when the RBT credential was created and insurance funding pushed for all of our services to be delivered by technicians. In lots of states, insurance access greatly expanded, but it was also very limited. You had to meet lots of qualifications, and now those are even changing more, where the longer you're in the ABA, the less you're going to get the older you get, which is sad to me. And so we expanded really quickly, and that meant that the demand for educated practitioners also expanded. Now, when we're in the 2020s, most ABA is delivered in clinics. Most ABA is delivered to individuals with autism, and most ABA is delivered to people under the age of 5. Now, we've heard from these lovely ladies and others that autism is not a pediatric disability. So we're kind of at a crux in our field, right? And how do we go past that? I love data, so I thought that this was really fun. This is the demand, how many jobs are out there for BCBAs. This is how many certificates we have. It's like double. Isn't that crazy? Also, this shift is, this is from the survey linked below. Recent data suggests that a quantity versus quality tension in BCBA training. While the number of BCBAs is going way up, the pass rates on the exam are at an all-time low. We're getting below 50%, and that's including people's second and third attempts, right? What's contributing to that? People are getting educated really quickly. They're getting educated often not in person. Supervision sucks. I'm sorry. Especially if you're working in a clinical environment, because guess what? Unrestricted hours are not billable. Doing supervision for trainees, not just clients, it's not billable. So why would they do it? They don't. One contributing factor is also the increase in the VCS course sequence. It means people that have a master's in a related field can take some online courses, and then next thing they know, they've got someone to sign off on their hours and they're testing. They're not passing the test right away, but eventually they are, and they're getting certified, and that kind of scares me. Another big factor, let's talk about money. Money is a huge motivator, not for me. I hate charging for services. That's probably why my business is not growing. I'm trying. But this is a projection of the growth of the autism industry. So what are they talking about on CNN and CNBC? Invest now, get a clinic. You will make buku money. Yuck. This is a really great study about the quality metrics along with profits, and it calls out some big names. So if you're interested, great study. All right. This has ethical, yes. Yes. Oh, yes. So here we are, right? That's where we were post-pandemic, when most of these companies were actually able to expand into multi-states. Ouch. How are we going to make all that money? We got to get a lot more RBTs and BCBAs. But how long do they last? Not long. Not long. So what happens to those services? Are they maximizing the benefit to the people receiving them? Are we able to treat each other even, let alone our clients, with compassion and dignity and respect? Are we still behaving with integrity? I hope so. But the last one, I think this is where competence is something that I feel like is declining. And that's something that we can change, because we're BCBAs. We can supervise, we can train, we can expand our scope and the scope of others, but it takes work, and you don't get paid for that work often. All right, so we're going to talk about the domains of ABA, right? And some ways that we can shift into different domains. this is where our founders came from, right? This is the science. This is our philosophy. This is what grounds us in being analytical and experimental and behavioral. Not a lot of people are working here anymore, right? Then we've got the experimental analysis, right? Tina was talking about the lack of research for populations that aren't making money, the kids with autism. So we're struggling a little bit there. If we don't have in-person master's programs, where do we get those PhD students to do the research? We should be living a lot here, right? Actually doing ABA. But I feel like what we're shifting to is behavior service delivery more than the scientific practitioner model. Are you guys familiar with scientific practitioner versus professional? So we're getting a lot of professionals out there, but I don't know that they understand and actually use the science. All right, so I'm going to talk about how we can align these branches with more of a coaching or a consult model and talk about how that shifts the clients that you will be working with and your service delivery. Conceptual analysis, right? The behaviorism. We still need people that are expanding the philosophy of ABA. There's a lot of bad raps out there for ABA treatment, probably because there's a lot of bad ABA treatment. But a consult can ensure that we can coach in ways that are behavioral and seek those outcome measures. We can connect it back to why we started doing ABA. So we're gonna not use mentalisms to describe outcomes or our clients. We're gonna try to get back to that behaviorism. We're going to use the evidence from the research from EAB to align our recommendations, our training strategies, and we're going to measure those results, not just anecdotal, like we said, right? We want some data-driven measures. Okay, the practice. This is where we should be working, right? Applying those socially significant problems and using effective and analytical strategies, not just copying and pasting treatment plans and BIPs that worked before. And then service delivery. This is where, as a consult or a coach, you can help implement into other realms, right? People that might not qualify for ABA in a more traditional setting, or people that are needing more support for other caregivers or others in their life. This is actually the coaching act when we can design some of those behavior service delivery models that others then can put into their environments. All right. We're going to talk a little bit about scope of practice and the difference between our scope of practice, which is everything that a BCBA or the field of ABA can do, and then how you can really narrow your scope to, as I say, chase your MO. Get up for work and love it. Want to be that change. Want to see that change. Want to inspire that change. That's not every day for everyone, right? But we want to increase that for ourselves, for the people we work with, for our clients. So to be an ethical coach, to be an ethical consultant, we're not just using our credentials and giving out great ideas and downloads. We actually want to individualize, which means we have to identify and define what is your area of expertise? What are you good at? You need to ensure that you're competent in that, not just you like it, not that you've had some limited experience, but you continue to grow that competence. You guys are here, so you like learning, which is great. I think the best part about being a behavior analyst is that I get to learn something new every day. And there's so much to learn. If you get bored, change the chapter, really and truly. And that's what I love about the consultation model, because every day can be different. It's also really important that we clearly define our role and those service agreements and outcomes. We, let's see, Tina said we're a science, not a place. So we want to make sure that we're using that science to define the outcomes, not just the place where that service might occur. And then we want to make sure that we are really monitoring those outcomes and using data, even when we're coaching, right? Even when we're not there observing the behavior change occurring. All right. So these are some of the ethics codes items that I think apply to how we define our scope, practicing within a defined role, communicating about services, and also making sure that we have a good service agreement in place. Communicating about services, I think, is something we can all do better at. I remember being in an ABA clinic and communicating about services happens like 2 weeks after the kid had already been in the center and we had a treatment plan, and there wasn't a whole lot of that indirect assessment going on. It's more like, here you go, this is what we're going to do. So we want to make that more collaborative, but we also want to be accurate. Molly said we don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, right? We actually want to define those measures and be sure that we can achieve them or monitor our progress. Okay. One thing that I think is important to keep in mind is that as a consultant or a coach, you become a mediator, right? And so you have to think about changing the mediator behavior, whether that's your technician, whether that's a teacher in a classroom, whether that's a business owner or a parent, so that they can change that target behavior, right? In our traditional individual service delivery model, the BCBA, the RBT, that's like a pretty clear chain of command, right? But when we're consulting, we don't always have direct access to the clients or the individuals whose behaviors we're trying to change. So we have to change our goals to focus on mediator behavior, because I can't predict or control these outcomes unless I know what's happening here, right? Does that make sense? Okay, this is a really great article and resource about mediator training in ABA. It goes beyond just that caregiver scope of training to talk about change agents that aren't actually related to the clients they're working with. A really great way that we can do this is to actually use behavior skills training, right? You guys learned about BST. We talk about doing it all the time, but how many times do you actually model, rehearse feedback? Really? We might model. Okay, I'll see you next session. Cool. But let's really like make that cycle work, because that's the way that we can actually see the change impact the mediator and hopefully flow to the clients and the targets. Okay. Some great research out there emerging about how BST can be applied in these different contexts. All right, so we're going to talk about creating some service agreements. This is tricky, and I will say that I recommend that you consult with a legal professional if you are doing any kind of contracts for services, because that is your credential on the line. It's really important that we distinguish being a consultant from being the primary provider, right? But we're not just a source of information. We're not just going to give opinions. We really want to define coaching in terms of what we hope to achieve and how we're going to shape those behaviors over time. So we're going to provide that know-how. We're going to reference our research, our evidence, but we also have to use motivational strategies to get the mediator to actually do the things that we're talking about. How many times have you guys had parent or caregiving coaching sessions that you feel like it's Groundhog Day? Didn't we just talk about this? Mm-hmm. Have you guys, did you try the fading? No, you didn't? Okay, that's cool. But we're still talking about this. How many times did you sit like across the table from a parent talking about their concerns or behaviors or showing them things, but not on the floor in their home during those behaviors that you're trying to coach them through? I could go on and on about how that impacts parents and how that kills the MO, and then we become aversive. Then there's a CMOR and they start canceling the meetings, and then they only want to meet virtually because they don't want to do it, right? So that's a hard behavior shift. It really is. But it's something that can be empowering if you can use those strategies that we use to motivate our kiddos, our adults, our clients, our learners, with those mediators, with the people that actually have the time and power to do it. So within our contract, we want to have that clarification of roles, right? I'm not going to come in and run this program for food selectivity in your home, but I'm going to monitor. We're going to have data. I'm going to come and observe, and I can shape your behaviors, but I'm not doing that, right? We also want to have a risk acknowledgement. I include a risk of harm in any kind of agreement I have with anyone, even a trainee, a fieldwork trainee or supervisee. Risk of harm, it's going to be uncomfortable at times, right? It might get worse before it gets better. How often do we say that? But really acknowledging the risk of this not being effective. It's also really important that we don't guarantee outcomes, because remember that mediator model? I'm not working directly with the targets that we're changing, but I can still measure the behaviors necessary, right? Taking data on your RBTs, it's great. And then also a crisis disclaimer, right? We'll talk a little bit in the filters about how we need to stay in our lane and avoid things that could lead to that increased risk of harm, making those safeguards, but we also need to have a crisis and safety plan. If you're not available and one of your consultees needs to call you because they're in a crisis, what else can they do? What other resources are there? Because I'm not a firefighter, right? And then also professional liability insurance. A lot of you guys that work for larger companies don't have to have individual policies, but you should. And ABAI members, and I think ATX ABA members get discounts. So it's an investment and it's worth it. It's kind of boring. No. Okay. Now we're going to talk about other ethical concerns when we are defining outcomes. So one of the big ones, effective treatment, right? And this is an area that's hard when you're not working directly with the people whose behaviors you're trying to change. But it is important that we make sure that we are using data-driven and analytic methods to show that change is being made. And that change is related to the consultation, the coaching, the following the plan that we have designed, right? It's also important that we keep in mind how to discontinue services. Coaching and consultation should not be a lifelong agreement. If you can't fade back the support of your supervisor or mentor, you're not ready, right? So we need to monitor that and define what our outcome measures are, and also just define when we might need to change those measures or that agreement. Okay, so defining those goals and outcome measures, again, the focus should be on the mediator behavior. Think about that person as your agent of change, right? How can we shape the skills needed in that individual so that we can transfer those skills? So instead of our common goals, like the child will engage in 50% less aggression, we want to measure the parent behavior. Parent will implement de-escalation protocol with 90% fidelity. Who loves taking data on parent or caregiver training goals? I know, right? It can be really fun. But those that didn't raise your hand, why? They don't want to take data. So how do we report? How do we master those goals? What do we say?
I did report, like, how do you feel that it's got
Self-report, yeah. Rating scales, outcome measures. Those are great to use with your coaches and consultees as well.
Questions like, did you do it?
Yeah. What's the fidelity in that, though? If we don't observe it, not picking on it, right? I'm just saying it's hard. It's hard. And then even if I did, and this was an easy goal, how many times are you going to actually engage in observing the parent and scoring that 90% fidelity during the behavioral crisis without prompting or stepping in? Are they? Oh no. Okay, observable fidelity measures, right? That's what I'm saying. We can't rely on indirect data only for this, right? Our outcome measures need to be observable, behavioral, measurable, hopefully quantifiable. I love qualitative data. It's important. but it's not what we're built on, right? Generalization and maintenance. We've talked about this a lot, and it is so important. If I'm not able to generalize that behavior change or the skill development from when I'm there and in this one situation, then did I actually provide effective behavioral change? And maintenance as well, right? Again, we don't want to create dependency on those prompts. We don't want to decrease motivation by making someone else responsible for those actual change agent actions, okay? So maintenance goals, I like to do probes. I like to do time sampling. I like to do blind data collection. People don't like that. Submitting videos, that can be a good way, right? If you are working virtually or don't have access to the home environment or the day program environment. But we do want to do some follow-up probes. And we also want to make sure that we're shaping and fading those prompting procedures, okay? And then termination criteria, right? We want to have a clear exit goal, and those can build, right? We can get through phase 1 of our consultation plan and then evaluate, have we actually achieved our long-term goal, or do we just meet an objective? Maybe our goals shifted, right? But we want to define that and we want to check in. One thing that is important to know is that a lot of our coaching or consult services, you're not going to be monitored by a funding source. You're monitored by yourself, by your own integrity, by your own motivation, by your own efforts. So we should use fading plans. We should monitor that discharge criteria. Otherwise, are we doing services for profit? Are we doing services for progress? Okay. I also think it's important to talk about scope of competency. Scope of competency is really important and we hear it a lot, but I think it's hard to understand what that really means, right? I'm not competent at everything I do, but I try, right? I can measure my behaviors changing. I really like this visual and diagram. It's available below. But scope of practice, that's that big blue circle, right? It's everything that EAB has studied. It's our philosophical assumptions. That's our scope of practice, meaning someone in ABA has done this and it's acceptable for others to do it. However, that's just authorized by our credentials. That doesn't mean that we're actually qualified to be successful in all aspects of the field, right? And this is a big disclaimer. Intensive escape extinction feeding. Who's ever done that intervention? Yeah, it sucks. Would you recommend that somebody read a research article about that, Tina, and then try it out on their own in a home with a child that might aspirate? No, right? So we have to build our scope of competence by defining our passions, by defining the things that bring us joy and motivation that we're good at, that we can see effective change in. And then we got to soak it up like a sponge and learn from everyone that we can. I'm really big about continuing education. I think we should have 32 credits a year, not every certification cycle. I'm glad to see that we're shifting more ethics, more supervision, more leadership. Sad about all that DEI stuff, but we'll get there. So that scope of competence is something that we can build, right? It's like a muscle or a skill. You practice it, you develop it. You stop practicing, you don't retain that competency. You guys know how quickly our field is changing, right? Some of the things that I did when I was first certified back in 2011 make me cringy right now. And I think it's okay to have that feeling. It shows that we're learning and that we're growing and that we're saying this is not okay. There are things that are going to be irrelevant, right? You might be really, really good at something and it might help you pair or develop rapport with your client. It's not related to ABA. Does that mean you can't practice it? Heck no. It's going to help motivate, help provide reinforcement, help to achieve that behavioral change. We just have to say, that's not part of ABA, right? I think about the athletic coaching and training, right? That's a combined approach. They're not saying our personal trainer is a behavior analyst. They're the expert in that. And we're going to use our behavior analytic capabilities and competence to show the connection that this intervention is changing this behavior, that's changing this quality of life. Okay. There are also some things that are outside of our scope of practice that we should not do, right? Unless you want to seek additional certifications, which I highly recommend. I know a lot of great BCBAs that are also licensed play and recreational therapists, right? I wish we had more BCBADs that were psychologists or counselors that could help model how to integrate that in a professional sense. If you find some good mentors, let me know. But it's important to try to define that and continually evaluate it. Again, it is going to be more personal and dynamic. It's based on your knowledge, your skills, your experience, your training, but also your application of that. I can learn a lot about something, but not practice it. And that doesn't necessarily mean I'm competent in it. Okay. We can be competent in procedures and strategies. We can expand our competence to different populations, like we've been talking about doing today, and how needed it is to branch out of kids with autism. We love them, right? But they're not the only ones that can benefit from behavioral service delivery. And then settings. I love that ABA is not a place, it's a science. Absolutely. So why can't we diversify that element of our practice? And then we want to make sure that we are sticking to that ethical mandate and staying within our scope. So the difference is that we can do a wide range of things, but we're not experts in all of those things. If you're going to transition to coach, to consult, to teach, to supervise, you should be an expert, right? We don't want to try to practice outside of the scope of ABA unless we have the certifications, the trainings, the licensure, the experience, the mentors to be able to integrate those other practices. And how can we do that? Seek supervision or consultation, training, mentors. I was having a conversation with Heather about the BCABA credential and how, like, what does that even mean? Who does that? How does that work? That's really sad to me, guys, because I wish I was an assistant analyst for the first 3 years of my practice. I wish I had someone still looking over my work and talking to me and challenging me. A lot of BCBAs in our field aren't motivated to continue that growth on their own. And I don't think that the corporate structure of advancement really matches professional development and measuring skills or outcome measures for clients or procedural fidelity. Okay. So that's something that really falls on your own motivation to invest more in your professional development, right? It's not easy, but it's worth it. And with those of you that have practiced or learned about ACT, man, it calms down those scaries when you are out there feeling like, ooh, am I stepping outside of my scope or competence today? But I have to get through this meeting and I have to sign off on that plan and I have to submit that report. Who helps you with that? Well, Tina, because she's a great clinical director, but really and truly, who helps you guys when you're stuck? I mean, hey, ChatGPT made my presentation prettier, hopefully. And it can provide us some good answers, some good places to look. I got hired to grade mock exam questions generated by AI. Oof, no, not fun. They do this term pairing where they just like pick random things and try to put them together and then test you. Oh, it was bad. It was bad. So I feel bad for people that are taking those free mock exams online. So I'm like, oh, the way that they explain that is wrong. It's very wrong. So, okay, do want to touch base on advertising non-behavioral services. Sometimes when you're coaching or you're consulting, you drift into that non-behavioral services, right? I do a lot of mentorship. That's one of the things that brings me the most joy is talking to burnt out BCBAs at the end of their workday and saying, hey, you got this. You do. You know what to do. You just have to be brave enough to do it. Okay. So if we are non-behavioral, if we're mentoring, if we're having vent sessions, like let's make sure that we can distinguish that. Okay. So identifying opportunities. Let's do another poll. Those of you in here, who's looked at other jobs in the last 12 months? Who's looked at jobs that were not in traditional ABA settings, just to figure out what else is out there? Yeah? How'd it go? Do you guys make a change? No, yikes, it's scary, right? But you can. It's a lot of vulnerability. There's not a lot of funding for services that are outside of that traditional model. But we're getting there. So we've got a lot of clinical skills that we might have developed in the early part of our practice when we were working one-on-one, and we can translate that into that mediator consultee model. We can translate that into a lot of things. So coaching is applying those clinical skills to different populations, different settings, different topics. Identifying motivation and priorities, probably the number one starting point in developing that relationship. Finding out what people really want to change and how much response effort they're really willing to give, and then finding ways to shape and adjust that. Clarifying goals and values. I love to do values assessments with everyone from my little bitty clients to the professors that are asking for help with their curriculum development. Why? Why do you want to change that? What keeps you going when you don't want to do that anymore? Grounding yourselves in your values and clarifying that and making your goals value driven for your consultees is important. For your parent training goals, it's important. Our goal in any kind of consultation or coaching is to build those repeatable and consistent responses, right? SD, response, consequence, it's the same. It's the same, and we want to be able to train loosely, but also apply precisely. Okay. That does involve teaching new skills and behaviors. I'm learning a lot of new skills and behaviors right now, like about lead metrics and business and magnets, and ew, I'm not motivated by it, but look, I make QR codes and handouts, so please use them. But we have to learn those new skills and behaviors, and I have to pair that with my values and my intrinsic motivation, which is I still believe in ABA. I still believe in the BCBA credential, and I still believe that the work that we do is so important, but not just in the ABA clinics, not just with the kids that have a clear diagnosis, not with the adults that got kicked out of one program and are floating to the next, right? We have to teach those new skills and behaviors that will matter. Identify the behavior cusp and chase them, because that's when real change occurs. And then we have to measure. We have to measure that progress, observe directly, take that direct data, and then provide feedback and be ready and willing to refine strategies. That was one thing that really drove me crazy in a clinical setting, is that a lot of people only updated their goals and treatment plans at that 6-month progress mark. Like, ew, Ew. If your behavior plan is not changing, if you're not able to fade your reinforcement rates, if you're not programming for natural contingencies, ew, right? That's not what we want to do. We're not just filling on squares on the assessment. We want to see the real changes. All right. So what are we experts in? Oh, this is pretty cute. We are experts in all of those things, y'all. We might need to invest a little bit more in our competency in certain areas. Where do you guys feel your strengths are? I used to say my strength was sitting on the floor with a client directly, and I could make that change. That was my sweet spot. But then when it didn't generalize, and when I had to rush into the room to de-escalate and support my RPTs who are crying and burnt out and not taking data and wanting to leave, that's when I realized that it wasn't necessarily effective unless we could fade and maintain, right? I know a lot of BCBAs that feel like firefighters when they're in a clinical setting because they're just running around from one crisis to the next. That doesn't feel good. Doesn't feel good for your staff either, right? So just a couple of areas that we can work on towards the bottom, right? These might be things that we're not necessarily doing in our current areas of employment. Habit change literature is fascinating. It really is. I was thinking about that with Ben and Josh, seeing them really lean into changing habits to change how we feel, to shift our MO. It's great stuff. Performance improvement, we should be experts in this if we're supervising RBTs, right? But it's still hard. How many RBTs have stuck with you or your clinic long enough for you to see them become a BCBA? How many? That's great. How many supervisors did you guys have when you were going through your field work? Raise your hand if it was just one. Okay, good. Is it 2? 3?
I'm on my fifth.
Call me. Yeah. Ew. Sorry. That's a spot right now that I'm very passionate about because I meet so many people that are like, I didn't know it was supposed to be like this when we start field work. And I'm like, you don't have any notes? Where you haven't, where's your resource folder? Where's your data review? How are you? You only know the VB map assessment. That's it, period. But do you know how to do it? People that have never heard of the barriers assessment, that's when I want to try to put my skull through a hard surface because I feel like that's more valuable than the skills tracking. So much more, right? And that can be used across the lifespan. Those barriers don't max out at 48 months, y'all. Okay. System optimization and efficiency. We should also be good at this because how efficient is your schedule when you got to get in all those billable hours, right? And then put your session notes in. And then make sure all your supervision is within the 5% ratio. When you're feeling burnt out, when you're working on a Saturday, just trying to catch up and stay afloat, you're reinforcing that system, y'all. When we take work home, when we work after hours, just to make those basic requirements, we're reinforcing a workload that's not sustainable. When our caseloads grow to where we don't even know all the caregivers, where we get new staff every 4 to 6 weeks, that's not sustainable. That's not efficient. That's not going to optimize our outcomes, right? And then organizational management. OBM is a great field. It's growing. It's hard to break into because those jobs are not posted as looking for a BCBA. They're looking for an MBA. Don't get your MBA. You don't need it. Okay, so finding your niche, right? For me, defining your values, defining your passion is how you create that motivating operation that's going to last. Even when stuff gets hard, even when the shit clogs the pipe or whatever it is, right? Sometimes having that explosive bowel movement is the biggest win of your day. How do you take that home, right? Because you change that family's life. Because that kid can go outside now, right? All right, so lots of opportunities, right? Like we saw with Ben and Josh, health and wellness is a great place to start. If you're passionate about that, if you like nutrition, get it, y'all. Life coaching and behavior analysis are right now. There's a big market for it, and I hope people are doing it sustainably and ethically, but find a path that you want to talk about outside of your work days, that you get excited about when you tell people what you do. I really liked Behavior Babe, Dr. Amanda Kelly's remarks about how you define yourself. Because I get asked that question all the time. What do you do for work? Consultant behavior analyst, used to work with kids with autism, but no, it's hard, right? I change lives. Okay, so lots of different opportunities. Something that you guys probably already have experience in, parent education and training. A lot of parents whose children go to full-time ABA clinics, the last thing they want to hear about is ABA or behavior or their parenting skills, right? But you know what they do want to hear about? Ways to make bedtime easier. How to reduce meltdowns at the dinner table. How to get a haircut without bribing your child. How to stop trimming toenails while people are sleeping. Okay, right? Those are big things that will actually make a difference in someone's everyday life and their quality of life. Performance monitoring, staff training and development. That's something I love. It's not something everybody loves, but seeing someone learn, whether that's a child or an adult or a principal, is really, it's pretty cool. That's my MO, right? Seeing those light bulbs, seeing the come to Jesus moment or the connection. Productivity and leadership. Where are our clinical directors or our leaders, business owners in the group? Who's supporting you? Want a hug? It's hard, y'all. It's hard. I think so many of us rose so fast in our field, and that felt really good at first. I mean, maybe. But then at the end of the day, it's freaking terrifying because you don't have time to take care of all your babies. And by babies, I mean your BCBAs or your clients or your caregivers. It's hard. I supervise trainees that have a clinical director that oversees 5 clinics with 10 BCBAs each. 1 clinical director. 50 BCBAs. How many clients do you think that is? Yeah, no. No. Does that clinical director know the names of the clients that they're responsible for? Ew. Okay. OBM. Again, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on OBM, but there are many opportunities available there. Being an entrepreneur is not easy. It's not, Jenna knows, it's hard to go from I have a dream, I have a vision to I can pay my bills with that dream and that vision. But you might sleep better. This is a great resource that comes from Autism COE that talks about in detail more BCBA career opportunities outside of autism with some really great examples. Check it out. Now we're going to talk about the 7 dimensions. That it's one of my favorite things to train on when I am doing fieldwork supervision, because I think that the 7 dimensions of ABA, for me, that's my anchor. That's how I know I'm doing ABA and not drifting into this like weird place of advising people. Okay. We want to be applied and make sure that the focus of our consultation, our supervision, our mentorship is socially significant changes, even if that's getting that BCBA not to call in sick every Monday. Technological, we want to be able to describe and model the changes we want to see so that they can be replicated, not by other BCBAs, not just by RBTs, but by, remember that mediator role? Those people don't have master's degrees. They're not going to take precision data for you. We have to make sure that it is still going to be replicable. Effective, again, we have to measure that change, and that can be hard to do. Qualitative data can give you some good direction, right? That feedback feels really reinforcing, but we also need to try to quantify the changes that we're trying to see and track that. Generality or analytical, again, the data makes us show our effectiveness, right? You can't really have one without the other. And generality, I think that's really kind of the goal of coaching or consultation. So I want to generalize what I can teach, what I can demonstrate, what we can do together. I'm going to step back. I'm still here for you. I'm going to step back a little bit more. You want to do one of those check-ins? I can call you next time, right? We also need to stay conceptually systematic. We want to make sure that we are staying in the lane of ABA, staying within our scope of practice, reading research. There's research that we can apply that's not just in Java, y'all. And one of my favorite things about being a fieldwork supervisor is I get to look into research and read journals all the time. Google Scholar is amazing. Your BACB resource access to those journals is pretty great, but you got to use it. And most of us, let's be honest, don't really have time. That's not my preferred bedtime reading. Doesn't pair wine well with a nice Cabernet. And then behavioral, right? We need to make sure that we're not coaching on concepts and ideas, but on things that we can observe and define and measure. I want to be a more flexible parent, okay? What does that mean to you? How can we measure flexibility? Does that mean that you can walk away and take a couple of breaths and then come back and give choices? Okay, we can work on that. All right, this is a QR code that you can download, this lovely BCBA consultation and opportunity filter tool. Using the 7 dimensions of ABA, if you have an opportunity come up and you would like to, you have to give me your email first. That's how lead magnets work, apparently. I was just going to put the PDF up there. If it doesn't work, let me know, and I'm sorry. There's also the actual PDF there too. But using these 7 dimensions, we want to create some filters so that we can identify, is this opportunity correct for us? So the first filter that we will look at is the applied and behavioral filter. How socially significant is this change? Does someone want their kid to be able to tolerate blue M&Ms? Don't care. Do we need to be able to go into a public bathroom? Yeah, that's pretty significant, right? So let's use a rating scale to develop that. We also want to know, is this action-oriented? Can we observe it? Can we describe the actions needed to increase or decrease this behavior rather than just internal states? Those are important. I'm a radical and progressive behavior analyst. We have to measure those internal states, and we have to accept and acknowledge that they do impact our motivation, the quality of reinforcement, our behaviors. And we need to still measure those, but we also have to have the observable, right? And then data feasibility and measurement. Are they gonna take data for you? Because if they're not, it's probably not gonna be easy to evaluate outcome measures or give feedback or refine our strategies, right? Then we want to look at analytical and conceptually systematic. Can we modify the environment? Is that something that we have the authority to change, the buy-in to change? Can we use function-based thinking? Is the person that we're working with willing to learn about the functions of behavior? Are they willing to learn about consequences beyond punitive ones and apply reinforcement? Hopefully. And then again, analytical. Can we define and measure and track this rather than just feeling like it's getting better? The next filter would be our technological and effective filter. I like to start with simplicity. Can I break it down and actually model and teach it to someone who has not been studying this, who doesn't need to know all that taskless vocabulary? I love saying putting it at about a 4th grade reading level, right? Really and truly. And that's not dumbing down our science, y'all. It's making it more effective for those that haven't studied the science yet, because we're teaching it to them, right? Time commitment. Are they actually going to invest in the time and efforts needed to make change? And then safety. That's a big one. I don't do consultation or telehealth or remote services for dangerous behaviors. I will refer you and we will get some of those behaviors under control. I will collaborate with your other service providers, but that's not appropriate. If I can't guarantee the safety of the people working, the mediators, or the targets, no thanks. That's a big one. I think it should be worth more points on my form, just say it. And then generality, right? Because that's our number one goal, to generalize what we know, what we can change to someone else. And we can fade back that behavior plan to naturally occurring contingencies and consequences. All right. And then are we able to sustain and create independence? We're developing a skill set. It's not a quick fix. I can potty train your kid in 48 hours, but when I leave, are you going to continue with the rest of that toileting independence development program? Because if not, you're going to be buying more pull-ups. And then is there a path to fade to independence? Our RBTs shouldn't be independent. I don't think our BCBAs should be independent, right? We need more of a cohort where we can support each other. I tried to tell all of my trainees as they're getting closer to that testing date, there should never be any BCBA islands. Don't isolate yourself. I isolated myself for a long time when I was experiencing burnout. There's lots of faces I don't know in here because I was afraid to engage with the ABA community because I didn't know who I could trust, who had the same values. Don't be afraid, y'all. Reach out. Find the people that you can align with and hold them tight because they will keep you going. They will keep you floating. Where can you get more information about this great stuff? Melanie Page, I don't know if any of you have done any of her trainings. She is my current mentor and support professional. She started with training BCBAs and OBM and then realized that there was a big need for teaching us how to scale and how to be able to start our own independent businesses. The things I have learned that have gotten me here, a lot of it have come from Miss Melanie Page. And so I can't recommend her trainings enough. She's a real human too. So yeah. There's an OBM practitioner training that is really great. She's kind of gotten in the niche of people that don't know what they want, but know they want something different and trying to define that passion. I would also recommend there is a BCBA coaching summit that's coming up offered by Behavior Live. And it's just dedicated to helping people learn how to define, describe, and develop tools to help them be successful. And then Tyra Sellers, who I love, has some really great information about scope of practice, scope of competency, and how to refine and grow yours respectfully, responsibly, ethically. All right, QR codes. They're pretty fun. Hopefully they work. That's really all I had for you guys, but I think we have maybe a little bit more time if there are questions. You guys want to share thoughts? I wanted to make it inspiring and not just like, oh man, look at what's happened. But I wanted to give a little bit of that, oh man, look at what's happened. Because most BCBAs that I know have been certified for less than 5 years. So this is all they know. Again, ew. There's lots more out there, y'all. Go find it, go chase it. I would love to connect with you guys. Like I said, not good at the business part of thing, but I am pretty good at the coaching part of thing. I try to inspire people and support them, but in ways that will actually motivate change, not just, and I give good hugs. So anybody that needs one, but what comes after that hug is a commitment to make a small change. All right. Thanks, guys. Oh, also, one more QR code, Amanda. Feedback form.